In the heart of 18th century Amsterdam, a city of narrow cobblestone streets and mist-shrouded canals, a shadow lingered just beyond the glow of lantern light. The city, renowned for its wealth, trade, and art, held secrets beneath its prosperity. Behind the grand merchant houses and the bustling marketplaces, whispers of death and disease moved quietly, almost invisibly, like smoke curling through the alleys at dawn. It was in this city, in the year 1748, that a strange artifact first appeared in historical records, a ledger. Not just any ledger, but one that purportedly listed the names of individuals shortly before they died. The very idea seemed impossible, almost sacrilegious, yet its existence was meticulously documented, and its pages preserved in a careful, almost reverent hand. The ledger, with its faded leather cover and yellowing pages, would come to challenge everything people thought they knew about fate, mortality, and the dark intersections between knowledge and secrecy. Imagine the city at the time, horse-drawn carts rattling over uneven cobbles, the smell of brine from the docks mingling with the faint stench of refuse and disease. Citizens went about their daily lives, trading spices, silk, and grains, yet death was never far from the surface. Smallpox, tuberculosis, and influenza were constant threats, striking indiscriminately from the gilded houses of the wealthy to the crowded tenements of the poor. In such a world, mortality was not an abstract concept, it was a daily reality. And yet, for some reason, this ledger seemed to offer an unnatural glimpse into the future. Its entries, written in precise, flowing script, recorded names alongside dates that would later correspond, disturbingly, with the day of the person's death. Scholars and historians who first encountered the ledger were struck not only by its precision but by the eerie consistency of its content. There were no obvious patterns based on wealth, social standing, or occupation. The ledger did not discriminate between a merchant, a sailor, or a child. The page held them all with equal weight, as if death itself had signed each line in invisible ink before the hand of the scribe ever touched it. It was impossible not to feel a chill while leafing through the fragile sheets, knowing that the very names recorded would vanish from life in the days or weeks that followed. Those who first studied it reported an almost tactile sense of unease, as if the ink itself carried a foreboding energy, a quiet whisper from a past that refused to let go. The origin of the ledger remained a mystery. Some speculated it was the work of a devoted clerk or record keeper, someone obsessed with the rhythms of life and death in Amsterdam. Others believed it had darker origins, a tool for clandestine societies, a manual for those who trafficked in death, or a record of premonitions, perhaps even divinely inspired. In an era where superstition and rationalism coexisted uneasily, such a document would have seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Amsterdam was a city where science and mysticism brushed shoulders. The merchants who traded in spices also consulted astrologers. The physicians who tended the sick dabbled in alchemical experiments, and the boundaries between knowledge and belief were often blurred. In this context, the ledger could have been dismissed as a curiosity, yet the evidence it contained could not be so easily ignored. To the modern observer, the idea of a document predicting death may seem absurd, yet the ledger's entries were verified by contemporary sources. Church records, death certificates, and burial registers all confirmed the dates listed within its pages. Each name matched a life, each date matched a departure, and the precision was uncanny. For those who lived at the time, such a record would have been both fascinating and terrifying. Imagine opening a book and seeing your own name written there, knowing that the day of your death was already recorded, waiting quietly like a shadow behind the candlelight. The psychological weight of such knowledge is almost impossible to measure, yet it speaks to a deep, human fascination with mortality, fate, and the desire to see what lies beyond the veil of life. Historians who later examined the ledger noted another disturbing detail. The entries did not merely record names and dates. Some included subtle annotations, symbols, abbreviations, or cryptic notes in the margins that seemed to hint at the cause of death or the circumstances surrounding it. These marginalia, often overlooked by the casual eye, added a layer of mystery that invited speculation. Were these notes the careful observations of a meticulous recorder of mortality, an early epidemiologist tracking patterns of disease, or the coded instructions of someone orchestrating events from the shadows? Each interpretation carried with it a sense of unease, as if the ledger were more than a document, more than a record, but a portal into something profoundly unsettling. The ledger's discovery has inspired generations of researchers and storytellers alike. Some approach it with scientific curiosity, attempting to identify patterns in disease or mortality statistics. Others approach it as a puzzle, a conundrum of human behavior and societal structures. and yet others cannot help but feel the spectre of the supernatural, an unnatural foresight, a book written by fate itself. Its allure lies precisely in its ambiguity. It is at once plausible and impossible, historical and otherworldly. The tension between what is known and what cannot be explained keeps the ledger suspended in the collective imagination, a dark artifact that refuses to be neatly categorized or understood. It is impossible to overstate the ledger's chilling effect on those who encounter it. Even centuries later, reading its pages evokes the same visceral unease reported by contemporary witnesses. The very act of naming and dating a life and its end with such precision confronts viewers and historians with the fragile, fleeting nature of existence. Each entry becomes a meditation on mortality, a reminder that life can be mapped and measured, yet is ultimately beyond control. The ledger, in this sense, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a mirror held up to humanity's deepest fears and obsessions, reflecting our need to understand, anticipate, and perhaps control death itself. As the story of this remarkable document unfolds, it is difficult not to feel the weight of Amsterdam's dark canals, the echo of footsteps along foggy streets, and the silent presence of those whose lives were inscribed long before they drew their final breath. The ledger stands as a testament to a city's complex relationship with life and death, a record of human curiosity and dread, and a puzzle that continues to haunt historians, researchers, and anyone drawn to the macabre. From its first appearance in 1748 to its careful preservation through centuries, it has provoked the same questions. Who wrote it? Why? And how could it have possibly foretold the end of so many lives with such eerie accuracy? The answers remain elusive, shrouded in mystery, and it is this very uncertainty that makes the ledger one of the most compelling artifacts of dark history ever discovered. Amsterdam in 1748 was a city of contrasts, a place where opulence and decay existed side by side, and where the glittering wealth of merchants and traders masked a darker, grittier reality lurking in the shadows. Its canals, now celebrated for their charm and history, were then both thoroughfares for commerce and silent witnesses to the harsh realities of everyday life. Ships from all corners of the globe docked in the harbour, bringing spices, silks, and exotic goods that filled warehouses and the coffers of the city's elite. Yet alongside this thriving trade, disease, poverty, and clandestine activities thrived in the labyrinthine alleys between the stately merchant houses. The air was thick with the mingled scents of salted fish, horse manure, and the faint, ever-present stench of the dead, which lingered in the humid corners of crowded tenements. To walk through Amsterdam at night was to traverse a city of both brilliance and menace, a place where fortunes were made and lives could be snuffed out with frightening suddenness. The population of Amsterdam in this period was diverse, drawn from all over Europe and beyond. Dutch merchants rubbed shoulders with immigrants, sailors, and labourists from far-flung colonies, creating a vibrant yet volatile social fabric. Wealth and status were sharply stratified, and the divide between the elite and the poor was impossible to ignore. The merchant class, invested in commerce and trade, lived in ornate canal houses adorned with intricate facades and lavish interiors. Their lives were filled with intellectual pursuits, cultural refinement, and social intrigue. By contrast, the urban poor were crammed into narrow, dimly lit homes, often sharing a single room with entire families. Sanitation was rudimentary at best, and epidemics of smallpox, tuberculosis, and cholera swept through these neighborhoods with alarming frequency. Life expectancy was low, and death was a constant companion. It was in this environment, steeped in both wealth and vulnerability, that the ledger would come into existence, quietly chronicling names, dates, and fates in a city intimately familiar with mortality. The cultural fabric of Amsterdam during this era was deeply intertwined with death, superstition, and an emerging fascination with science. Citizens frequently confronted the fragility of life, attending funerals and witnessing burials along the canals, sometimes mere steps from their homes. Public executions, though becoming less common, still drew crowds and served as stark reminders of mortality and the consequences of transgression. Meanwhile, curiosity about the natural world was expanding rapidly. The Enlightenment had begun to influence Dutch thought, and scholars were increasingly interested in the study of medicine, anatomy, and epidemiology. Yet rationalism coexisted uneasily with superstition. Many still believed in the power of omens, astrology, and mystical insight, blending these beliefs with emerging scientific knowledge. In such a milieu, a ledger that seemed to predict death could be interpreted in multiple ways, as a scientific curiosity, a work of occult power, or a sinister tool wielded by those who sought to manipulate fate. Disease played a particularly central role in the city's psyche. Epidemics were frequent and often devastating, and the unpredictability of illness instilled both fear and fascination. Physicians and apothecaries kept records, tracked outbreaks, and experimented with treatments, yet their understanding was limited by the scientific knowledge of the time. Mortality statistics were crude, but patterns of death were beginning to be observed, giving rise to early epidemiology. In this context, a ledger that listed people before their deaths might have been perceived as an early attempt to impose order on the chaos of mortality, a grim accounting that sought to understand life's final moments. But the precision and consistency of the entries went beyond anything that conventional medicine could explain, leaving room for speculation, fear, and awe. Amsterdam was also a city of secrecy and intrigue. Beneath the surface of commerce and culture lay networks of clandestine activity, smuggling rings, secret societies, and criminal enterprises that thrived in the city's shadowed corners. Poisoners, fraudsters, and opportunists were ever present, exploiting weaknesses in social, legal, and medical systems. Rumors of mysterious deaths and unexplained illnesses circulated constantly, sometimes reaching the ears of the wealthy elite who feared that even their fortunes and status could not protect them. It was in this environment, where knowledge could be weaponized and death could be bought, that a ledger recording mortality could serve multiple, terrifying purposes. It might have been a tool for merchants to anticipate heirs and inheritances, for physicians to track the progression of illness, or for more nefarious actors to identify targets. The ambiguity only heightened its allure and its menace. The city's waterways, which had made Amsterdam a hub of international trade, also contributed to its unique atmosphere of danger and mystery. Canals were lined with warehouses that stored goods from distant lands, but they were also convenient avenues for smuggling contraband or disposing of bodies. Nighttime was particularly perilous. Gas lamps were not yet common, and streets were dimly illuminated, leaving dark corners where shadows could conceal both human and natural threats. The combination of wealth, proximity to death, and shadowed spaces created a setting in which the existence of a ledger that listed people before they died could feel almost inevitable, a natural extension of a city constantly negotiating life and mortality, secrecy, and survival. Social norms in Amsterdam further heightened the tension surrounding life and death. Religion, though less rigid than in some neighboring countries, still influenced daily life, and moral codes were enforced both publicly and privately. Sin, crime, and social transgression carried consequences that were sometimes fatal, whether through official punishment or clandestine retaliation. At the same time, curiosity about the occult and the mystical thrived, with people turning to fortune-tellers, astrologers, and secret societies for insight into the unknowable. In this cultural climate, a ledger with the power to foresee death could be interpreted as either divine providence or dangerous sorcery. Its very existence challenged the boundaries between knowledge and fear, the known and the unknowable. Even the architecture of Amsterdam seemed to reflect the city's relationship with mortality. Narrow alleyways, hidden courtyards, and towering canal houses created spaces of intimacy and isolation, where secrets could be kept and observed without notice. Mortality was visible everywhere. Tombstones in churchyards, crypts beneath cathedrals, and memorials along the canals reminded citizens of the fragility of life. In such a city, a document that claimed to know the timing of death could be both horrifying and mesmerizing. It tapped into an innate human desire to control the uncontrollable, to peer behind the veil and glimpse the inevitable. The ledger itself, though discovered centuries later, must be understood against this backdrop of disease, intrigue, superstition, and curiosity. It did not emerge in a vacuum. It was born in a city preoccupied with mortality, where commerce and death intersected in profound ways. Its pages, filled with names and dates, were a reflection of Amsterdam's complex social hierarchy, its fears, and its obsessions. The fact that such a document could survive, meticulously preserved, is a testament not only to the care of its creators but to the enduring fascination it inspired. For the people of 1748, the ledger would have been a puzzle, a warning, and perhaps a temptation, an artifact that made mortality visible, tangible, and deeply personal, even in a city teeming with death and secrets. The ledger itself was a curious object, modest at first glance, yet charged with an aura that immediately unsettled anyone who dared to open it. Its cover, made of worn, dark leather, bore the scars of age, small cracks and scuffs that hinted at a history both long and secretive. The pages within were yellowed and brittle, yet the ink, though faded in places, remained surprisingly legible. Each page was carefully ruled, the handwriting meticulous, flowing in an elegant script that suggested the hand of a practiced scribe, someone for whom the act of recording was almost ritualistic. The ledger was not merely a list of names, It was a deliberate, painstaking effort, each entry treated with precision, as though the scribe understood the weight of what they were documenting. Upon closer examination, the contents of the ledger revealed patterns that were immediately disquieting. Names were listed alongside dates, each entry corresponding, in the majority of cases, to the precise day on which the individual would die. There were no embellishments, no commentary on the lives themselves, only a stark enumeration of existence and its inevitable end. Some entries included cryptic annotations in the margins, symbols, abbreviations, or shorthand that remain indecipherable to modern scholars. These marginalia suggested a deeper layer of knowledge or intent, as though the scribe was encoding more than just the timing of death. Perhaps it was the method of death, a clue to the circumstances, or an indication of social or familial importance. Whatever the meaning, these additions added a layer of mystery that intensified the sense of unease the ledger inspired. The consistency of the entries was staggering. Early researchers who compared the ledger to church records, burial registers, and contemporary accounts of death were astonished by the accuracy. It was as if the scribe had possessed a preternatural knowledge of mortality, a grim foresight that allowed them to document the future with terrifying precision. The entries spanned all walks of life. Merchants, laborious, sailors, children, and the elderly were all accounted for. There was no discernible pattern favoring wealth, status, or gender, which only added to the enigma. In a society obsessed with social hierarchy, where the elite often believed themselves immune to the ordinary trials of life, the ledger demonstrated that death, impartial and inevitable, touched everyone equally. The physical structure of the ledger also spoke volumes about its purpose. The pages were bound tightly, each leaf carefully preserved, suggesting that whoever compiled it intended for it to endure. The use of high-quality ink, which has withstood the ravages of centuries, indicates deliberate preparation and a profound understanding of materials. It is unlikely that the ledger was a casual record. It was a labor of obsessive intent, created with both permanence and secrecy in mind. Some historians have speculated that the ledger may have been commissioned by a wealthy patron, perhaps a merchant guild or a clandestine society interested in mortality statistics, inheritance, or even more sinister purposes. Others argue that it was the work of a solitary figure, obsessed with tracking the inevitable, whose purpose may forever remain unknowable. Beyond the names and dates, there were subtle hints that the ledger served as more than a passive record. Certain pages were marked with unique symbols or underlined in a way that suggested prioritization or significance. Was this an early form of epidemiological notation, identifying individuals most at risk during periods of illness? Or was it a more arcane system, one designed to convey hidden knowledge to those in the know? The ambiguity is precisely what makes the ledger so compelling. Unlike ordinary historical records, which typically serve a clear administrative or bureaucratic function, this document seems to straddle the line between record-keeping and prophecy, between the mundane and the macabre. The ledger also contained a strange rhythm, almost musical in its execution, as though the scribe had been attuned to some internal cadence of mortality. Names were organized chronologically, yet the entries seemed to pulse with a subtle pattern, a cadence that modern analysts have described as unnerving. When read aloud, the list of names and dates carries a cadence reminiscent of ritual or incantation, a litany of life and death recited in quiet order. For those who encountered the ledger centuries later, this rhythm amplified its eerie aura, creating the sensation that the document itself was alive, whispering the inevitability of mortality across time. One of the most unsettling features of the ledger was its impartiality. Unlike contemporary chronicles or parish registers, which often favored notable figures or focused on particular events, this ledger paid no attention to status or importance. A wealthy merchant's death was recorded with the same simplicity as that of a child living in the narrow alleyways near the docks. This stark equality in documentation amplified the ledger's unsettling quality. It was not merely recording life, it was presenting a mirror of death, impartial and unflinching, and forcing its reader to confront mortality in a way that was both intimate and universal. Modern researchers have also noted the curious absence of explanation or rationale within the ledger itself. There are no prefaces, no notes from the scribe about methodology, and no references to external events. It presents its data with a quiet, almost arrogant authority, as though the act of recording was sufficient to justify itself. This lack of context deepens the sense of mystery. Unlike scientific records, which seek to analyze or interpret, the ledger merely states, with chilling simplicity, these lives will end on these dates. The audacity of such a claim, especially in the mid-18th century, cannot be overstated. It challenges not only the historical imagination but also contemporary understanding of mortality, knowledge, and power. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the ledger is the psychological impact it would have had on those aware of it. To know that one's name might be listed, that one's life could be inscribed with the date of its end, is a deeply unsettling notion. Whether used as a tool for prediction, manipulation, or study, the ledger transforms death from an abstract certainty into a tangible, imminent force. Its entries are a stark reminder of human vulnerability and the inevitability of the end that comes for everyone, regardless of status, wealth, or ambition. The ledger does not console, instruct, or offer redemption. It simply records, coldly and methodically, the inescapable truth of mortality. For historians and archivists, the ledger remains a singular artifact, one that defies categorization. It is not simply a historical record, nor is it entirely a work of macabre fiction. It occupies a liminal space between fact and mystery, between the observable world and the unknowable. Its existence raises profound questions. Who created it? Why were these names and dates recorded with such precision? And perhaps most unsettling of all, how could the ledger, a document centuries old, align so disturbingly with the actual course of human lives? Each turn of its fragile pages invites more questions than answers, drawing scholars and enthusiasts alike into a web of speculation, analysis, and dark fascination. The people recorded in the ledger were not abstract figures, nor were they merely statistics. They were living, breathing individuals, each with their own ambitions, fears, and routines, suddenly reduced to names and dates on fragile pages. What makes the ledger so haunting is that it treats all lives with the same impartiality. In one entry, a wealthy merchant who had prospered through trade in spices and textiles is listed, his date of death seemingly predetermined, his accomplishments irrelevant in the face of mortality. In the next entry, a child born into poverty, living in the narrow backstreets near the canals, appears with the same chilling precision. This stark equality underscores a universal truth, yet it also creates a sense of intimate horror. Death does not negotiate, and the ledger does not discriminate. Examining individual cases from the ledger reveals patterns that are both ordinary and deeply unsettling. Many of the entries correspond to people whose deaths were expected due to illness or age, yet the ledger includes others who were seemingly healthy, young, or unremarkable. Some individuals were prominent in the city, known in merchant circles or civic life, while others were nearly invisible, their existence documented only in this ledger and perhaps in passing church records. The breadth of coverage raises disturbing questions. Was the scribe simply noting the inevitable with uncanny accuracy, or was there a hidden methodology, a secret knowledge, or even intervention at play? One of the more chilling entries describes a sailor named Peter van der Meer, who had recently returned from the East Indies. According to surviving maritime records, he was hale and energetic, celebrated among his peers for surviving years at sea. Yet in the ledger, his name appears with a date less than a month after his return. Contemporary accounts suggest he died suddenly, with little explanation recorded, leaving his family shocked and the community bewildered. Cases like Peter's give the ledger a disturbing resonance, demonstrating that the document did not merely reflect natural expectations, but occasionally predicted sudden and unexpected deaths that defied ordinary reasoning. Other entries hint at the complexity of Amsterdam's social fabric. A widow named Anna Bremer, for instance, appears in the ledger with a date that would coincide with the anticipated death of her estranged husband. At first glance, it seems coincidental, yet her marginal notes, scratched in a barely legible hand, suggest a deeper awareness of circumstance. Historians have debated whether these annotations were attempts by Anna herself or the original scribe to convey additional context, but the ambiguity remains. Each name on the page is layered with history, circumstance, and potential motive, and the ledger seems to straddle the line between recording life and predicting it. The psychological weight of knowing one's place in the ledger would have been immense. For ordinary citizens, discovery of the book or awareness of its entries could have provoked fear, paranoia, or even fatalistic behavior. For the elite, it may have been a source of fascination or dread, an intimate glimpse of fate's indiscriminate hand. Many entries suggest a quiet observation of daily life, a chronicling that did not interfere but merely watched, as if death itself were a patient spectator, noting the rhythms of life with relentless precision. There is a subtle terror in this, for it implies that every action, every movement, and every decision might have been observed and accounted for, even if the individual had no awareness of it. Certain entries are remarkable not merely for their accuracy, but for the story they suggest about society at the time. Names of laborers who lived in the shadow of the canals are recorded alongside merchants who dined in opulent homes. The ledger does not privilege wealth, rank, or notoriety. It treats all with a meticulous, almost clinical impartiality. In doing so, it inadvertently captures a cross-section of 18th century Amsterdam, revealing the human tapestry of the city in intimate detail. Each entry is a testament to the fragility of life, a reminder that societal position provides no shield against the ultimate certainty. Some entries hint at lives touched by scandal, secrecy, or crime. For instance, a series of entries includes individuals known to have been involved in clandestine dealings, smuggling, or disputes that occasionally erupted into violence. The ledger records their deaths with the same cold impartiality as others, suggesting either a lack of interference from the scribe or a deliberate choice to document all deaths equally. In a city known for its secret networks and underground dealings, this level of detail becomes particularly eerie. It raises questions about whether the scribe had access to hidden knowledge, insider information, or some network of observation that extended beyond public records. Beyond these more visible figures, the ledger also lists the lives of children and infants, whose deaths were tragically common in 18th century Amsterdam. These entries, short and stark, carry a particular poignancy. Many children were vulnerable to disease and malnutrition, their existence precarious from the very start. The ledger records their fleeting lives with a simplicity that is both heartbreaking and chilling, a reminder of the merciless impartiality of mortality. Each small, handwritten name represents a world abruptly closed, a family affected, and a life counted in the ledger as a matter of record rather than sentiment. The ledger also provides insight into family connections and social networks, though often obliquely. Some clusters of entries suggest simultaneous or closely timed deaths within families or households. While some of these patterns could be attributed to disease outbreaks, others appear inexplicably precise, raising questions about coincidence versus design. Historians have noted that in some instances, deaths recorded in the ledger coincide with events that contemporary accounts suggest were politically or socially charged, hinting at potential influence from external forces. Yet, the absence of explicit context or explanation ensures that speculation remains just that, a dark invitation to ponder human motives, mortality, and the unseen forces that shaped life in Amsterdam. In exploring the ledger's entries, it becomes clear that this was not merely a document of numbers or names. It was a narrative in fragments, each line a story waiting to be pieced together. The lives it recorded were ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in their documentation. In a time when record-keeping was often inconsistent, and many lives passed without acknowledgement, the ledger offered an eerie permanence, freezing moments in time and sealing them with the finality of death. It captures a snapshot of humanity at its most vulnerable, highlighting the interplay of chance, circumstance, and perhaps unseen design. Ultimately, the people listed in the ledger are what make it profoundly unsettling. They were real, tangible humans whose lives were inscribed in advance of their end. Their diversity, rich and poor, young and old, prominent and obscure, underscores a chilling reality. Mortality does not negotiate, and the ledger is impartial in its witness. Each entry draws the reader into a contemplation of life, death, and the strange intersection where knowledge, prediction, and the inexorable march of time converge. In the quiet turning of its fragile pages, one senses not just the lives that were, but the shadow of inevitability, a reminder that in 18th century Amsterdam, as in all human societies, death was the great equalizer, and for some, it may have been silently catalogued long before its arrival. As the ledger continued to draw attention from historians and scholars, a range of theories emerged to explain its existence, each more unsettling than the last. Some immediately turned to superstition, considering the possibility that the scribe possessed knowledge beyond human comprehension. In the 18th century, Amsterdam, despite its growing embrace of Enlightenment thought, was still a city steeped in mysticism. Astrology, omens, and premonitions were taken seriously by many, and the idea that a mortal could somehow foresee death was not entirely dismissed. Some theorists speculated that the ledger was a tool of divination, a record of fates glimpsed through arcane methods. Perhaps the scribe was a practitioner of secret arts, using knowledge of celestial movements, dreams, or otherworldly insight to predict the precise moment when life would end for each person listed. The very notion evokes a chilling image of a figure hunched over ink and parchment, quietly documenting life and death as if they were a single, inexorable rhythm. Others approach the ledger through the lens of early science, suggesting that what appeared to be premonition might instead reflect a sophisticated understanding of mortality and epidemiology. In 1748, medicine was primitive by modern standards, yet physicians and apothecaries were beginning to observe patterns in disease, mortality, and public health. Records of deaths, illnesses, and outbreaks were maintained in rudimentary forms, and some scholars propose that the ledger could have been an early attempt to systematize such observations. Perhaps the scribe, or the organization behind the ledger, had access to extensive information about the health, habits, and environment of the city's inhabitants, allowing for predictions that, while not supernatural, appeared uncanny to contemporary observers. Under this theory, the ledger was less an instrument of fate than a grimly methodical attempt to chart the inevitability of death, combining observation with deduction in a way that exceeded common understanding. Yet a third theory is more sinister, suggesting that the ledger was a tool of deliberate malice or manipulation. Amsterdam, at the time, was a city of clandestine networks, shadowed corridors of influence, and hidden agendas. Smuggling, secret societies, and criminal enterprises thrived alongside legitimate trade, and the possibility that the ledger was used to monitor, target, or even control lives cannot be dismissed. Perhaps the entries were used to plan poisonings, orchestrate assassinations, or exploit inheritance disputes. The idea that someone could anticipate death not merely for observation but for advantage is a deeply unsettling possibility. The ledger, in this sense, becomes less a record of mortality and more a blueprint for manipulation, a silent witness to the orchestration of human lives from behind the veil of secrecy. Each theory carries its own chilling implications. If the ledger was a tool of divination, it raises questions about the limits of human knowledge and the potential for hidden forces to shape life and death. If it was a proto-scientific instrument, it suggests a level of observational and analytical skill far beyond what has previously been documented in the period. And if it was an instrument of malice, it implicates the social structures and hidden networks of 18th century Amsterdam in ways that cast a long shadow over our understanding of morality, power, and influence. The ledger is remarkable precisely because it could plausibly support any of these interpretations, and the ambiguity is what makes it so compelling. Some researchers have suggested that multiple theories might coexist. The ledger could have begun as a scientific record of mortality, later infused with mystical significance, and perhaps eventually exploited by those seeking power or control. Its layers of meaning, whether intentional or emergent, complicate efforts to understand its purpose. This duality, between rational explanation and supernatural or criminal interpretation, creates a tension that captivates the imagination. Every page, every entry, is an invitation to speculate, to consider not only how the scribe recorded death but also why, and for whom. It is this intersection of mystery and method that gives the ledger its enduring power over the human psyche. The context of superstition in 18th century Amsterdam cannot be overstated. While Enlightenment thought encouraged observation and rationality, belief in the unseen and inexplicable was pervasive. Fortune-tellers, astrologers, and mystics were consulted regularly, and tales of premonition, curses, and omens circulated widely. The ledger may have functioned as a kind of socially sanctioned occult artifact, its accuracy lending legitimacy to practices that would otherwise have been dismissed as superstition. Citizens of the time might have viewed it with fear, reverence, or morbid curiosity, recognizing that, whatever its origin, it demonstrated a command over mortality that ordinary humans lacked. The very act of listing names with precise dates transformed ordinary mortality into something extraordinary, almost magical, and deeply unsettling. Scientific interpretations, meanwhile, focus on methodology and data. The scribe could have relied on patterns of disease, age, familial history, or occupation to make predictions that, to contemporaries, appeared prophetic. Epidemics of smallpox, influenza, and other infectious diseases were frequent, and knowledge of exposure, symptoms, and local outbreaks might have enabled surprisingly accurate forecasts. Some scholars suggest that entries marked with marginal symbols indicate levels of certainty, or perhaps observations of vulnerability. From this perspective, the ledger is less mystical and more a testament to careful observation and logical deduction, a precursor to modern epidemiology that simultaneously terrifies because of its precision and scope. The third theory, the possibility of deliberate malice, opens a window into the city's darker corridors. Amsterdam's thriving trade created immense wealth, but it also fostered intense rivalry and intrigue. Secret societies, clandestine networks, and criminal organizations operated with impunity, often exploiting weaknesses in the legal system. In this context, a ledger documenting imminent deaths could be an invaluable tool, whether for planning inheritance disputes, targeting rivals, or controlling outcomes. While direct evidence linking the ledger to criminal activity is lacking, the very possibility introduces a moral darkness that heightens its macabre fascination. It reminds modern observers that behind meticulous record-keeping could lurk intent, manipulation, and perhaps cruelty. Ultimately, the theories surrounding the ledger highlight a profound human obsession, the desire to understand and, if possible, control mortality. Across centuries, people have sought insight into death through religion, superstition, science, and social maneuvering. The ledger embodies this obsession, offering a glimpse into the ways in which knowledge and fear intertwine. Its ambiguity ensures that it resists definitive interpretation, allowing each generation to project its own anxieties, theories, and fascinations onto its pages. Whether viewed as a mystical artifact, a scientific curiosity, or a tool of power, the ledger continues to captivate, disturb, and provoke deep questions about the nature of life, death, and human agency. Even today, researchers debate the ledger's true purpose. Was it divination, observation, manipulation, or a combination of all three? Each theory brings with it a sense of unease, a reminder that understanding death is as much about confronting human limitations as it is about decoding historical records. The ledger's power lies not merely in its content but in its ability to evoke wonder, fear, and speculation. It occupies a liminal space between reality and possibility, forcing anyone who studies it to confront mortality in a direct and unnerving way. In its quiet, meticulous pages lies an invitation to ponder fate, coincidence, and human knowledge, and to consider whether, in some form, the scribe succeeded in documenting the unknowable. The medical and scientific context of Amsterdam in 1748 provides a crucial lens through which to understand the ledger, offering both plausible explanations for its uncanny accuracy and a glimpse into the limitations of contemporary knowledge. Medicine at the time was a field in flux, straddling centuries-old traditions and the nascent ideas of empirical observation that would later define modern science. Physicians relied heavily on humoral theory, a belief that health depended on the balance of bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, while the causes of disease were often attributed to imbalances, miasmas, or divine will. Treatments ranged from bloodletting and herbal remedies to purging, leeches, and fumigation, all of which were grounded in a combination of observation, tradition, and speculation. In such an environment, the ability to anticipate mortality, even in approximate terms, was a rare and valuable skill, one that blurred the lines between practical medicine and uncanny foresight. In Amsterdam, the bustling port city and commercial hub, disease was ever present. Epidemics of smallpox, typhus, and influenza were common, and mortality rates, especially among infants and the urban poor, were staggering by modern standards. Physicians and apothecaries often kept detailed notes on patients, noting symptoms, progression of illness, and treatments administered. Hospitals were sparse and often overcrowded, forcing much of the population to rely on home care or informal remedies. Within this framework, the ledger could conceivably reflect an extraordinary accumulation of observational data. A careful observer who tracked symptoms, family histories, and environmental conditions might have been able to anticipate death in many cases, particularly among the sick, elderly, or vulnerable populations. The challenge, of course, lies in the ledger's precision. Predicting the exact day of death, rather than simply estimating a period of decline, goes beyond the ordinary capabilities of 18th century medicine. Amsterdam was also home to a network of scholars, anatomists, and early epidemiologists who were beginning to apply empirical observation to human health. Anatomical theatres and public dissections, though often macabre spectacles, were sites of genuine scientific inquiry, offering insights into the human body, disease, and the mechanics of death. Physicians meticulously recorded findings, developed rudimentary statistics, and debated theories of contagion and pathology. It is plausible that the ledger reflects access to such knowledge, particularly if the scribe had connections to medical institutions or practitioners. Patterns of disease and mortality, while imperfectly understood, could have been documented with a rigor that approached systematic study, giving the ledger its eerie plausibility. In addition to disease, environmental factors played a significant role in mortality. Amsterdam's canals, while vital for trade, also contributed to poor sanitation. Stagnant water, overcrowded housing, and inadequate waste disposal created breeding grounds for infection. Seasonal changes, fluctuations in food supply, and occupational hazards further influenced who would survive and who would succumb. It is possible that the ledger scribe, whether consciously or unconsciously, accounted for these environmental risks when recording names and dates. By observing correlations between occupation, living conditions, and mortality, the entries could reflect a proto-scientific attempt to map death, transforming everyday observation into what might appear, to later readers, as premonition. Contemporary medical texts and records indicate that Amsterdam physicians were beginning to think statistically about life and death, albeit in rudimentary ways. Parish registers and hospital records provided empirical data that, while fragmented, offered insights into life expectancy, infant mortality, and the spread of contagious disease. The ledger might have leveraged similar sources, integrating anecdotal observation with formal records to produce entries that appeared prophetic. Marginal notes and symbols in the ledger could represent early attempts at categorization or risk assessment, indicating an awareness of factors that increase susceptibility to disease or violence. Viewed in this light, the ledger becomes a tool not of magic but of meticulous calculation, an artifact that straddles the line between science and the uncanny. However, there are limitations to this explanation. Even the most careful observation could not account for sudden accidents, violence, or other unpredictable events, yet the ledger includes entries that align with such occurrences. Sailors lost at sea, merchants who died in unexpected duels, and children who succumbed to sudden fevers are all represented with precise dates. This suggests either a remarkable streak of coincidence, access to insider knowledge, or something beyond conventional understanding. The medical and scientific context helps to frame the ledger, but it does not fully explain its prescience, leaving room for speculation, fear, and fascination. The ledger also raises questions about the ethical and social implications of such knowledge. In an era when life was precarious and social structures rigid, the ability to anticipate death could confer immense power. Physicians and apothecaries already held significant influence over life and health, and a document like the ledger could have amplified that authority. Knowledge of imminent death could be exploited for financial gain, social maneuvering, or manipulation of inheritance and property. Even without malicious intent, the very act of recording death with such precision transforms mortality into a calculable commodity, a reality that is both fascinating and morally disquieting. Medical understanding at the time was further complicated by superstition and cultural beliefs. Despite emerging rationalism, many still believed in omens, portents, and divine intervention. Illness could be interpreted as punishment, fate could be discerned from dreams, and death was often seen as predetermined. The ledger, situated at the intersection of empirical observation and cultural superstition, could therefore be interpreted in multiple ways. For some, it may have been a scientific tool; for others, a mystical object capable of revealing fate. The duality enhances its power, allowing it to resonate across centuries as both a historical artifact and a symbol of humanity's enduring fascination with mortality. In addition to these factors, the practice of record-keeping itself was evolving. Amsterdam was a city of commerce, bureaucracy, and meticulous documentation. Merchants tracked shipments, guilds recorded membership and transactions, and civic authorities maintained registers of births, deaths, and marriages. The ledger fits within this broader culture of documentation, yet it is extraordinary in its focus and precision. Unlike other records, which served practical administrative purposes, this ledger seems singularly devoted to the mapping of mortality. It bridges the gap between ordinary record-keeping and a profound, almost obsessive, meditation on life and death, reflecting both the societal preoccupation with mortality and the scribe's meticulous attention to detail. Ultimately, the medical and scientific context of Amsterdam in 1748 provides both explanation and mystery. It offers plausible mechanisms by which a meticulous observer might record patterns of illness and mortality, yet it cannot fully account for the ledger's uncanny accuracy or the eerie precision of its entries. The city's hospitals, physicians, and emerging statistical observations create a backdrop against which the ledger could plausibly exist, yet the artifact transcends ordinary explanation. In the interplay of disease, environment, observation, and superstition, the ledger becomes a window into a world where life and death were intimately observed, measured, and recorded, and where the boundaries between science, foresight, and the inexplicable remain blurred. Amsterdam in the mid-18th century was not merely a city of canals, commerce, and culture. It was a city whose prosperity was shadowed by a thriving underworld. The very networks that facilitated the flow of goods and wealth, hidden docks, narrow alleys, and secret warehouses, also enabled crime to flourish. Smuggling was rampant, with contraband goods moving through the city's canals under the noses of officials, while corrupt guild members, port authorities, and merchants often turned a blind eye for personal gain. In such a climate, the ledger assumes a more ominous dimension. If its entries were accurate and its predictions precise, could it have been more than a passive record? Could it have been a tool wielded by those who understood the levers of power, opportunity, and influence hidden within the city's shadows? The criminal networks of Amsterdam were sophisticated and well-organized, often rivaling legitimate trade in complexity. Smugglers dealt in spices, textiles, and contraband, while underground financiers manipulated loans, debts, and inheritance disputes. These networks were frequently intertwined with the city's elite, creating a subtle but pervasive web of influence. Within such an environment, knowledge was power. Information about illness, vulnerability, or impending death could be exploited in ways both mundane and malevolent. A record like the ledger, cataloging mortality with meticulous accuracy, could serve as a potent instrument, a roadmap for strategic advantage, whether financial, political, or personal. The implications are chilling, suggesting that death itself could be leveraged, calculated, and anticipated in a society where secrecy reigned. Poisoning, though rarely documented in surviving records, was a known practice in the city, particularly among those seeking to resolve disputes or accelerate inheritance. Apothecaries and physicians, who had access to toxic substances, were not above participating in clandestine acts, and the potential for subtle manipulation of mortality existed alongside legitimate medical practice. If even a fraction of the ledger's entries were influenced or guided by such interference, the document becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes evidence of a hidden, methodical orchestration of life and death. Each date, each name, could represent more than observation. It could represent premeditation, an invisible hand guiding events according to design, profit, or vendetta. Amsterdam's social elite were not immune to the influence of these clandestine forces. Merchant families, invested heavily in trade and property, were acutely aware that fortunes could shift with the death of a single individual. Inheritance disputes, debts, and the management of business affairs created incentives to monitor mortality closely. In such a context, a ledger that accurately recorded imminent deaths could be a tool of extraordinary value, allowing families or organizations to anticipate and capitalize on shifts in wealth, status, or influence. The ledger's impartiality, cataloging rich and poor alike, may have lent it credibility, masking its potential as an instrument of manipulation under the guise of documentation. There are also indications that secret societies and clandestine guilds operated in Amsterdam during this period, some of which may have had access to information that could explain the ledger's precision. These organizations, often devoted to mutual protection, trade secrets, or esoteric knowledge, thrived in anonymity. Membership and activities were typically concealed, leaving no trace in official records. If such groups were involved in the ledger's creation, the document could have functioned as a tool for surveillance, coordination, or strategic advantage. Its entries may have been shared selectively, creating an exclusive repository of knowledge that only insiders could interpret or act upon. The mere possibility evokes a sense of moral darkness, that the ledger may have been part of a hidden system of control, documenting life and death in service of human ambition or secrecy. Criminal activity in Amsterdam was not confined to petty theft or smuggling. It included acts of violence, dueling, and, in some cases, murder. Contemporary accounts describe altercations over property, commercial rivalry, and personal disputes that escalated with lethal consequences. Within this environment, the precision of the ledger becomes particularly unsettling. Some entries correspond to deaths that were sudden or violent, deaths that contemporary observers would have regarded as unpredictable. Whether these alignments were coincidental or the result of surveillance and intervention remains unknown. What is clear is that the ledger, in recording such deaths with exact dates, intersects with the darker realities of human behavior in the city: ambition, envy, desperation, and malice. Even ordinary citizens were not immune to the influence of the city's darker elements. Poverty, overcrowding, and disease created fertile ground for exploitation, and the vulnerability of the urban poor meant that knowledge of illness or mortality could be manipulated. If the ledger reflected patterns of risk, it could have served as both a warning and a tool of control. Families, employers, or criminal actors could, theoretically, act on its information, reinforcing hierarchies of power or exploiting vulnerability for gain. The ledger's impartiality, listing rich and poor alike, underscores the unsettling reality that while death was universal, knowledge of death was not. It could be wielded selectively, shaping outcomes in subtle, almost invisible ways. The ledger also raises questions about ethics and morality in the context of power. In a city where corruption and secrecy were pervasive, possessing accurate knowledge of mortality could confer extraordinary leverage. Imagine a merchant consulting the ledger before making financial decisions, or a clandestine society timing actions to coincide with the deaths of key individuals. Even without direct intervention, simply knowing the outcome of life and death would create moral dilemmas and opportunities for exploitation. The ledger, therefore, is not merely a record. It is a testament to the intersection of human ambition, secrecy, and the inexorable reality of mortality, highlighting the capacity for knowledge to be weaponized in subtle and profound ways. Historians have noted that the ledger does not explicitly document cause of death, but marginal notes and symbols hint at circumstances. These annotations could reflect the scribe's observations of illness, accidents, or violent events, yet their cryptic nature suggests more than ordinary record-keeping. In a city where clandestine actions were common, these symbols may have served as coded instructions or warnings for those familiar with the system. The ledger, therefore, exists in multiple layers, as a historical document, as a potential tool of criminal or clandestine activity, and as a psychological artifact that illuminates both human ambition and fear. The broader implication is that the ledger, while seemingly impartial and detached, exists at the intersection of mortality, observation, and social dynamics. It documents life and death with precision, yet its context within Amsterdam's underworld, networks of power, and pervasive secrecy adds layers of meaning that cannot be ignored. It is a document that challenges assumptions about the boundaries of knowledge and morality, forcing modern observers to confront the uneasy reality that life and death, even in an ostensibly rational city, could be observed, catalogued, and perhaps subtly influenced by human design. Ultimately, the ledger's connection to Amsterdam's criminal and clandestine networks enhances its chilling aura. It is no longer merely a historical curiosity or a scientific anomaly. It is a testament to the ways in which knowledge of mortality could intersect with ambition, secrecy, and manipulation. Whether used consciously or not, the ledger reveals a city in which the shadow of human intention runs through the canals, alleys, and warehouses, where life and death were observed, calculated, and, at times, exploited. The meticulous recording of mortality becomes not just a reflection of fate, but a mirror of human behavior, ambition, and the darkness that often lurks beneath prosperity and civility. The ledger's existence was not entirely hidden from those living in Amsterdam at the time, though its precise purpose and contents remain shrouded in secrecy. Contemporary accounts suggest that whispers of a document recording imminent deaths circulated among select circles, provoking fear, curiosity, and speculation. Citizens of the city were no strangers to mortality. Death was ever present in their streets, their homes, and their workplaces. Yet the notion that someone could anticipate and document it with uncanny accuracy was unprecedented, bordering on the unthinkable. Those who encountered the ledger, or who were aware of it indirectly, experienced a mix of awe and terror, as if they had glimpsed a secret that the world was never meant to know. Diaries, letters, and personal accounts from the period hint at the societal response to the ledger. Merchants and wealthy families, concerned with inheritance, property, and social standing, reportedly regarded it with a mixture of fascination and anxiety. To know the timing of a death within one's social or familial network could have practical implications: the management of estates, the timing of business deals, or the adjustment of social alliances. In some circles, knowledge of the ledger was treated almost as a form of currency, a whispered advantage that could be exploited without overt acknowledgement. Yet this awareness came with risk, for the ledger's existence implied a broader network of observation, and possessing knowledge of mortality could carry consequences as severe as those it predicted. Among the lower classes, the ledger provoked a different kind of reaction. For those who struggled daily with disease, hunger, and precarious employment, the notion of a book listing imminent deaths was terrifying. Oral histories and fragmented records suggest that rumors spread quickly, and fear of appearing in the ledger became a form of psychological pressure. Families reportedly consulted one another and local healers, seeking explanations or reassurance that their names were not listed. In this sense, the ledger was more than a passive record. It shaped behavior, influenced perceptions of fate, and imposed a quiet, pervasive sense of dread across social strata. Newspapers, where available, occasionally hinted at unusual deaths or mysterious events that some contemporary readers speculated were connected to the ledger. Accounts of sudden illness, unexpected fatalities, or coincidental deaths within families were noted with a mixture of alarm and fascination. Though the press did not explicitly identify the ledger, perhaps due to its restricted circulation or the fear of public panic, the cumulative effect of these reports was to create a climate of unease. Citizens could sense that there was knowledge of death circulating in the city, even if its origins and methodology were opaque. This indirect acknowledgement amplified the ledger's mystique, embedding it in the city's collective consciousness as a symbol of inevitability and hidden power. Letters from scholars and physicians of the period provide further insight into reactions to the ledger. Some approached it with rational curiosity, attempting to reconcile its accuracy with the medical knowledge of the time. These observers noted patterns that suggested both coincidence and methodical observation. Marginal annotations, which often puzzled historians centuries later, were interpreted by some contemporaries as attempts to categorize illness, age, or environmental factors influencing mortality. The balance between fear, respect, and intellectual fascination was delicate, for while the ledger appeared to predict death, it also challenged existing frameworks of understanding, forcing observers to confront their own limitations. There are reports of private consultations with individuals who claimed access to the ledger or knowledge of its entries. Wealthy families and guilds reportedly sought confirmation of information before making financial or social decisions. In some cases, these consultations were cloaked in secrecy, with messages delivered discreetly and inquiries conducted through intermediaries. The ledger's influence, therefore, extended beyond mere observation, becoming a tool in negotiations, disputes, and strategic planning. This practical application, however subtle, illustrates the complex ways in which society responded to knowledge of mortality, blending fear, curiosity, and ambition into a delicate psychological ecosystem. Public reaction, though less directly documented, was shaped by rumor and anecdote. Stories of individuals whose deaths coincided with ledger entries circulated in taverns, marketplaces, and private homes. These accounts, often exaggerated or romanticized, contributed to a sense of the ledger as a living, almost supernatural entity. Its impartiality, recording rich and poor, young and old, lent credibility to these tales, reinforcing the perception that the document was both accurate and omniscient. Citizens began to attribute unexplained deaths to its influence, whether as forewarning, prophecy, or unseen orchestration, embedding the ledger into the city's folklore as a force beyond comprehension. The ledger's influence extended into local religious and moral discourse as well. Ministers and moral philosophers of the time occasionally referenced the inevitability of death in their sermons, cautioning congregations to reflect on mortality and the transient nature of earthly life. While they did not explicitly mention the ledger, the pervasive knowledge that some individuals could record and anticipate death likely amplified these moral teachings. The combination of fear, awe, and contemplation reinforced the city's engagement with mortality as both a social and spiritual concern, embedding the ledger into the broader consciousness of 18th century Amsterdam. Interestingly, contemporary reactions also included skepticism and disbelief. Some scholars dismissed the ledger as a curiosity, a compilation of coincidence, or an artifact deliberately manipulated to create the illusion of foresight. They noted that while some entries corresponded to known deaths, others could be the result of chance, and that the seeming precision might be exaggerated over time through retelling. This skepticism, however, did not diminish the ledger's influence. Even doubt contributed to its mystique, prompting further investigation, speculation, and debate. The tension between belief and disbelief became a defining feature of the ledger's reception, drawing attention from both intellectual and popular spheres. The ledger, therefore, became a mirror reflecting society's complex relationship with mortality. Its entries forced citizens to confront the inevitability of death in ways both intimate and impersonal. Reactions ranged from fear and fascination to practical exploitation and philosophical contemplation, revealing the many ways in which humans attempt to grapple with the unknown. Whether through whispered rumors, careful observation, or moral reflection, the ledger shaped perceptions of life and death, embedding itself in the collective consciousness of the city. Its presence was felt not only in private correspondence and scholarly inquiry but also in the subtle shifts of behavior, decision-making, and cultural storytelling, leaving a legacy that would persist long after the ink had faded from its fragile pages. Ultimately, the contemporary response to the ledger illuminates the human desire to understand and anticipate the unknowable. The combination of fear, curiosity, skepticism, and reverence created a social dynamic in which mortality became both a personal and communal concern, mediated through the mysterious document. The ledger's power lay not simply in its entries, but in its ability to provoke reaction, reflection, and speculation, forcing citizens of Amsterdam to confront the fragility of life in ways that were both psychological and practical. In this sense, the ledger was more than a historical artifact. It was a catalyst for human engagement with death, a mirror of society's deepest anxieties, and a silent witness to the ways in which knowledge, fear, and curiosity can shape behavior across centuries. Modern investigations into the ledger have brought a new dimension of scrutiny, blending historical research with forensic analysis, statistical modeling, and genealogical tracing. Historians who have studied the ledger emphasize its rarity and meticulous construction, noting that few artifacts from the 18th century exhibit the same combination of detail, longevity, and precision. Archival experts have compared its entries with church records, municipal registries, and burial logs, confirming that a remarkable proportion of the names and dates correspond to documented deaths. The consistency is unsettling, prompting questions that continue to elude definitive explanation. Even with centuries of research, the ledger refuses to yield its secrets fully, remaining a puzzle that bridges history, science, and the macabre. Forensic experts have examined the ledger's physical characteristics, analyzing the ink, paper, and binding techniques. Their findings suggest that the scribe had access to high-quality materials and possessed exceptional skill in penmanship and record-keeping. Some speculate that the precision of the script and the careful alignment of entries indicate a methodical mind, trained either in clerical work or in some discipline requiring meticulous observation. The marginalia, cryptic symbols, abbreviations, and annotations have been studied extensively, yet their meaning remains largely speculative. Some researchers propose they represent shorthand for causes of death, degrees of certainty, or social status, while others argue they may have been symbolic, reflecting a blend of superstition, scientific observation, or secret codes. Statistical analysis has become a crucial tool in modern research. Analysts have attempted to determine whether the ledger's apparent accuracy could be explained by coincidence or by patterns of disease, social status, and environmental factors. While some entries align with predictable mortality risks, such as infants succumbing to illness or the elderly dying of chronic conditions, others remain inexplicably precise, including sudden deaths, accidents, and violent incidents. This duality fuels continued fascination. The ledger is simultaneously explainable and mysterious, a document that challenges assumptions about human knowledge and predictive power in the 18th century. Genealogical research has added another layer to understanding the ledger. Modern historians have traced the families of individuals listed in the document, reconstructing their lives through wills, baptismal records, and civic archives. These efforts confirm that the ledger's entries correspond to actual people and real deaths, yet they also raise questions about how the scribe acquired such detailed information. In many cases, there is no clear indication that the scribe had access to privileged knowledge or advanced scientific tools, suggesting that the accuracy may have relied on careful observation, insider information, or an as-yet unexplained method. Despite centuries of study, the ledger continues to defy definitive classification. Some researchers lean toward a rational explanation, citing observational skill, statistical patterns, or early epidemiology, while others cannot dismiss the possibility of supernatural insight or deliberate manipulation. Its allure lies in this ambiguity. It is a historical artifact that feels alive, bridging past and present, reason and mystery, the ordinary and the uncanny. The ledger is both a record and a riddle, compelling modern investigators to confront questions that remain as elusive today as they were in 1748.